Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Rangers Review morning briefing for Friday, the 20th of August. I'm Derek Clark. I'm joined by Joshua Barrie and Jonny McFarlane. It's the morning after the night before, after Rangers' 1-0 victory over the Armenian side, Alashkert at Ibrox, down to 10 men, of course, with John Lundstrom's first half sending off. Alfredo Morelos pops up once more to make sure that Rangers take a precarious lead, you could say, over to Armenia next week. Joshua was at the game for us. What was your main takeouts, Joshua?
Main takeouts was, Derek, that it was a pretty underwhelming first half. I think it was a first half. If you could have written out kind of the worst fears of Rangers fans, it would have played out in that first half. It was slow. No one really wanted to take responsibility. The sending off from Lundstrom kind of epitomised the team that looked a little bit unnatural, and especially after beating Dunfermline on Friday, I think that was a disappointing thing that there wasn't that just incision. And I wrote in my piece this morning, they were going round and round Alashkert, which is what Rangers play badly, or when Rangers are playing badly, they do that. They play the safe ball. The exceptions being Hadji wanted the ball all the time, and Barrie was pretty good, and the only one that seemed to have a little bit of invention. Second half, it all seemed to change really from a passage of play when Rangers went through Alashkert. They were able to kind of keep their defensive shape because, as we know, the forwards aren't tasked with necessarily tracking back, which helped. They were able to keep a high line, so it meant that when they got the ball back, they weren't within their own penalty box. But it all seemed to change in about 50 or 55 minutes, coincidentally, when there was a period of play where they kind of played through the lines quickly, and that just got that was all the crowd needed, and the support was fantastic, and I think the players really needed a positive atmosphere, and it was so noticeable and stark, the change. And I think most people in Ibrox last night would tell you the same, that as soon as there was a little bit of encouragement from the pitch, and the fans stayed with the team the whole game, but the noise was incredible. And from there, it kind of took care of itself. So in my mind, although it's disappointing and it couldn't get much worse. It can't get any worse. You're 10 men of a tie. You're completely expected to win against a team that's 8th or 9th in the Armenian division, albeit they were the champions last season, but they've started very poorly. It doesn't get worse. And the players, instead of hiding in that second half, did manage to step up and did take responsibility, did take ownership, and managed to recover what was a dire situation, or could have been a dire situation. So left with questions, but I think some positives in relation to how the team deal with situations like that. It had shades of Hamilton, but I think they recovered it well, and I think Jared will take some comfort from that.
Yeah, a lot you get in touch already on the show. Hi to Billy. Callum says, I really hope we can beat Ross County on Sunday and to carry that momentum into next week's second leg. Thomas McDougall says, we're making life difficult for ourselves at the moment. Jonny, watching from television, we had a discussion yesterday about the team selection that he went with, Phil Hollander as opposed to Leon Balogun. Good to see Calvin Bassey start on the left-hand side. I think he put in a decent showing as well. But the main talking point from that first half is John Lundstrom's sending off. It was just moronic.
Yeah, it wasn't particularly something that's going to help endear him to the Rangers support, given he's already had a pretty difficult start to life at Ibrox. I think he was open in his last press conference where he sort of said, yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with it, or I'm going to take time to get used to the tactical element. I think it's fairly obvious that the tactical requirements of playing on the side of a Rangers 3 is more demanding than what he's been used to. And I think what we've seen over the years with players that have come into that, unless they have been in there for quite a long time, they struggle. Now, Stephen Davis, I think we all agree, is a brilliant player. Incredibly talented. Really, really terrific at this level. The best midfielder in Scotland, with most people would agree. Okay. Now,
Glenn Kamara might have an argument.
Glenn Kamara might have an argument, but let's just say, for argument's sake, he is, right.
Yeah.
He struggled. When he came in, he didn't play for the first couple of months. The Stephen Davis of old didn't really come to fruition for Rangers until quite deep into that first half season that he had. Even Glenn Kamara himself, you mention him, he wasn't instantly the player that we see today. I remember him making a really bad mistake, for example, against Hearts, that pretty much gifted the Jambos a goal in that game. And Kamara wasn't just an instant success. He was really good, but, he had his moments. And I think there's always going to be time of adjusting to this kind of formation. And John Lundstrom's going through that. But listen, away from all the excuses for him, there's no excuse for what he did last night. The first challenge, he did not need to scythe the guy away like that. I mean, tactical foul, okay, but I think he could have got away with not doing that or doing it in a more subtle way. The second one is just, you can't be grabbing onto someone when they're going past you when you're already in a booking. Was there a lot in it? No, but it was a yellow card. It's as simple as that. And listen, no wonder he didn't look Gerrard in the eye as he went off, because he knew himself, and you could tell with his body language that he was well aware that he'd let the side down. And it's a long way back from him from here. Now, we've seen players do it in the past. Mark Haley had a particularly bad spell when he arrived. Joshua's too young to even remember that. He was probably not even born at that point.
McCoy, Stephen.
You remember Borna Barisic, who went from zero to hero at Rangers. So it can be done. But I think Lundstrom, he might be best, if it's possible, for the team to sort of maybe take him out the firing line for a few weeks. Just give him another 3 weeks of training, drilling him, so he tries to get his head around this, because at the moment he's just digging himself a hole, and it's been a really, really difficult start for a player I think we all agree has qualities and should be able to add something to that Rangers team.
I think the difficult thing is with Lundstrom, with his role, is that there's so much emphasis on him setting the tempo. So you see him and he spoke about that in the press conference, but you see when he rotates in, Tavernier pushes up the line, Lundstrom is tasked with, in that role, finding the striker's feet, playing the ball. And he clipped a couple of nice balls last night, mixed in with a couple of switches that went out of touch. But the difficult thing is, it's not really a position where you can come in and rely on other people to set the tempo. When you're in a possession-heavy team, he is going to have the majority of the ball alongside the centre-backs, and if it's Glenn Kamara on the other side, whoever. So I think that's the difficult thing. Everything's enhanced. But you're right, he's obviously not a bad player, but I remember Stephen Davis in a 4-0 win over 4-1 or 4-0 win over St Mirren, when Defoe and Morelos played together in maybe February 2019, and he really struggled, and it took him time to find his position, to come back to be the six. Scottish football's so quick, and it will take time, but I completely agree that he's done no favours to endear himself with a red card, which obviously probably comes from trying too hard, trying to win the ball quickly instead of just biding his time to impress the crowd. And he does have a wee bit to work back, I think, or more than a wee bit to work back and earn the trust of the crowd again.
I think this is a thing that we're seeing more and more often. Sorry to interrupt, Eric. Yep. Just this idea of players who have come from a different style of play really struggling. We saw it across the city with Shane Duffy last year, where Shane Duffy spent his entire career being a siege defender, and he was expected to go to Celtic and develop playing at the back. And Celtic fans were really excited about Shane Duffy arriving, but actually there was no body of evidence to suggest he could adapt to that. And maybe there's an element of that with John Lundstrom. This is such a different scenario at Rangers to what he's been used to. And Derek, you know about what he did at Sheffield United more than any of us, because you've been down there covering that, and you've seen him down there live in the flesh playing for that team. But it's very, very different playing for Sheffield United and playing for Rangers, both in the expectation, the cauldron atmosphere surrounding the club, and just the being on the front foot and being expected to get the tempo going, as Joshua says. And listen, you look at his skill set and you look at the fact he coped in the Premier League, and you think, well, he will be able to cope. He will be able to be a star man for Rangers. But actually, it's more complex than that. And we're seeing more and more at clubs where there is an ingrained philosophy, an ingrained style, a proper game model, that you also need to kind of think about what players have to adapt to coming into this. Because it's not just go out and play your game, son, as it was back in the Souness era. He always talks about when he was at Liverpool. I think it was Bill Shankly said to him, look, it might have been Bob Paisley, but I think it was Bill Shankly said to him, we just think you're the best player in that position, so go out and do what you do, son. That is not football anymore. And I think it's something that we, as journalists and fans as well, watching the game, have to be quite cognizant of, because it seems to be, certainly in Scotland, there's more and more issues surrounding this sort of placement of players being asked to and expected to do a different role than they've done before.
Yeah, you sort of stole my thunder there a wee bit, Jonny. I was going to say that.
Right.
I mean, Sheffield United, they were a siege team under Chris Wilder. We all remember the overlapping centre backs and what have you, hitting teams on the break. So this is alien to him, and it's going to take him time. Callum Milligan sort of echoes that point and says he needs time to settle after joining the club. I'm all for giving him time. I'm not all for that senseless sending off last night, which is just stupidity personified. Moving on from that, though, it's certainly clear that Gerrard got the hairdryer out at half-time, gave a few of them a few home truths. We've never seen Ryan Kent emerge for the second half. Scott Wright instead came out and, according to Steven Gerrard, had a superhuman performance. Joshua, how good was he?
Oh, excellent. He just changed the tempo right from the start. The thing is, I'm always wary to kind of argue that players don't look interested in that. I wouldn't say that, because I just think it's quite vague. But what I would say is I don't think the intensity was there from Morelos and Kent that they displayed the week before in terms of pressing the ball, and that the energy wasn't maybe there in the whole occasion. But what Scott Wright did was press everything, work back, cover the extra man coming into the midfield when he needed to. He was direct. He almost set up Hadji within about a minute of coming on. And I think he already had the trust of the manager, but he really earned it. And the thing is, I think, Derek, seen that, and we'll maybe come on to this, but Rangers weren't getting played off the park by Alashkert. They were beating themselves in that first half. They were totally the cause of their own downfall. And I think Alashkert had one shot off target the whole game. This wasn't an end-to-end game in which Rangers struggled to get up the pitch. And what Scott Wright helped was simplify things. He drove at Alashkert, and he made it uncomfortable, as opposed to there were so many occasions in the first half where the ball was popped into Ryan Kent's feet, or even Morelos or anyone in that front line, and instead of there being a bit of incision to try and upset their back line, it went back and it went back round, and it was comfortable. What Scott Wright did was he was direct, and I think Steven Gerrard's comments on him were, when scarcely has he praised the player so outrightly after a game, and he said that all the fans will be proud of him. I think he was evidently really proud of Scott Wright himself. Calvin Bassey was also superb. I thought Joe Rebo had a good second half, as did David and Yanis Hadji. Yanis Hadji pulled up with cramp in 92 minutes and got up and ran back to cover, which anyone at the game will have seen, and that was I think quite a superhuman effort as well, because he was in a lot of pain, but he still made up and made an interception. So, but yeah, Scott Wright has to start the next game, because as Calvin Bassey did when he came in against Dunfermline, he's really impressed the manager.
Yeah, Jonny, Joshua mentioned Hadji. For me, him and Wright were the two-star performers, closely followed by Bassey and then Aribo, I would say. They've certainly made themselves undroppable, I feel, these players.
Yeah, and quite a contrast to Ryan Kent, who I thought was just really poor again. And yeah. I remember Kent, when he first arrived at the club, one of the things that we would see quite often, and especially when he's going through a bad spell, he tends to pick up the ball in the sort of deep half space where there's about 9 players in front of him. Yeah. He picks the ball up off the centre half, so he picks the ball up in a really, really deep area off one of the fullbacks. And it's just not where you want to see Ryan Kent on the ball. Let the fullbacks progress the ball forward from there, or the central defenders, or Stephen Davis. Get yourself in a position where you can use your skill to make the difference in a decisive area. And it's so frustrating seeing him do that. And it's always a sure sign that he's in a sort of regressive period of form, because he seems to slip back into that, and it just takes the sting out of the sort of slickness of Rangers play. So I think Scott Wright, given how he just looked so on it, didn't he, from the moment he came on, given how he pressed, how quick he looked, how dynamic, he's putting Kent under severe pressure, because I think Hadji as well, although not a lot came off for him, you cannot fault his graft. I mean, it was superhuman, his graft. I mean, that moment where he's down with cramp, he's thrown himself back up. I mean, you can't question his commitment. And listen, we had a great piece on the website yesterday from Stevie Clifford. They talk about good timing, hailing Hadji and basically saying, that this guy is underappreciated to some extent. And listen, he's absolutely right. But I'm seeing little shoots of Hadji making that exponential growth we often talk about in players that you need at Rangers from one season to the next to become a truly great Ranger. And I'm already seeing signs of him developing that maturity of taking control and taking ownership and bits of leadership. And that's really, really encouraging to see. But at the same time, disappointing that we're not seeing that from Ryan Kent. So I don't know what's going on there. Certainly very, very unusual to see Ryan Kent substituted at half-time under Gerrard. And I think is that the second time that's happened this season? So that's one to keep an eye out, because he's certainly not in form, that's for sure.
Yeah, Graham Frew gets in touch. Bassey was brilliant in spells that players weren't using him as well, which was unusual. I wanted to pick up on what Steven Gerrard said in the press conference. Jonny, we'll start with you. He said that the players need to wake up collectively. It's not been good enough. Quite telling, his comments. You could clearly see he was fizzing at the end of that game. And he's quite right too. The players haven't started the season as well as you maybe would have thought they would have. What do you think that could be down to?
Oh, well, no, he's spot on. He's absolutely spot on. And I think there was a sense, and listen, we've probably been guilty of this to some extent here. I certainly thought, for example, Rangers would comfortably win this league by 20 points again, because I looked at Celtic and thought, the squad's all over the place, all the best players are leaving, they're going to have to go and bring in a load of players without a director of football. Some of them might be hits, but a lot of them will be misses because they'll be forced into bringing in players quickly. And Ange Postecoglou and how he adapts to Scottish football is a bit of a mystery. It's hard to judge it. But I think it's quite clear across the city that there's going to be more of a sustained challenge this year. Just from looking at Celtic, they look a much better organised side. And certainly going forward, they're very good. They've got flaws, and Rangers will try to exploit them. We'll have a lot of coverage on how they can do that this week. But more generally, and to focus my point in, it's that I think at league level, they're going to have a challenge. They're going to have a challenge for the Cups. And obviously, there's always the challenge in Europe. And Rangers just cannot afford any complacency at all. 56 is more important than 55 in a lot of ways because of the Champions League money. Now, emotionally, it's not. Of course not. But financially, that incredible incentive to be guaranteed that place at the top table of European football in the Champions League, just that is huge. And whichever one of the two teams is able to secure that is going to give them a massive advantage in the seasons ahead. It's as simple as that. So that's where I'm coming from when I say that about the importance of this year. And the players at Rangers just cannot get themselves lulled into a false sense of security that we'll win the league by 25 points. Celtic are not a threat. They are a threat. They've signed the guy who looks a shoe-in Furuhashi to score 30 goals this season. And that alone will bring them up significantly. Now, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. Furuhashi might break his leg. We don't know. But I think it's clear, if you're being rational, that there is more of a challenge than we thought there would be. So Rangers have to wake up and wake up fast because they've woken up.
Yeah, absolutely. Joshua, another piece of news from the game last night was the announcement of the new signing, Juninho Bacuna from Huddersfield Town. He was paraded, was it a half-time? He was brought out for a little wave to the stand?
It was superb because the funniest thing about it was Rangers went down to 10 men and then a Tannoy announcement went up saying, your new signing at half-time. And you just thought, because they've obviously, I think was it Varane was announced really successfully at halftime again when Man United were beating Leeds. So it's not quite the same effect when you're 0-0 with Alashkert. And then also what happened was, and I don't know if he was meant to come down the tunnel and go into the middle of the pitch and applaud in the middle. but he ended up being somewhere down the front of the main stand anyway. But when he was announced, an Alashkert substitute came out, so everyone was looking at him thinking, that's not Bacuna. Who have we signed? Do you know what I mean? And then this substitute obviously seen all the eyes on him, and he was just out to get banana or something. And so it was quite a strange. But joking aside, I think Bacuna is obviously a player, has loads of potential, is a bit of a rough diamond, and as a project player, without selling, this is the market I think Rangers are in until they recoup some money in a player trading model. We know that, but obviously we've got a really detailed piece on him in the site. I had some Huddersfield fans who were tweeting me basically saying, you should have started, your preview by speaking about how inconsistent he is and And while I'm sure that's true, obviously trying to look at it from a more optimistic point of view, you look at Kamara, being benched by Martin Woods before he left Dundee, Balogun getting relegated with Wigan. It's not always about the team that the players come from, and so often their environment plays such a big role in how they play. And if you looked at Ryan Kent last night in a performance, you wouldn't have. And someone told you he was maybe one of the best players in a Rangers shirt last season, you wouldn't have believed him. So he's been playing in a team that for 3 years have been in a downward spiral, relegated from the Premier League, finished 18th, finished 20th. Before that, he was a 20-year-old who'd played nearly 100 games for Groningen. I think that he has a lot of raw attributes that could be coached really well into playing a midfield role. Really powerful, dynamic runner, good upper body strength, but also is just so good one-on-one and has that kind of languid, press-resistant style that Kamara and Aribo both have. So he feels like a player that I can't imagine it's a big monetary-wise deal, but he feels like a player that could be quite a high reward for if it works out. And he's 24. He's not fulfilled his potential yet. It's on him as well. He's not. I'm sure he's not coming up to Scotland thinking, I'm sure he's coming here to think, look, this is a team who have developed players. This is a coaching staff who have developed players. I want to play in front of these fans, and I want to go and fulfill my potential, because at this point at 24, he's not. So I think it makes sense, a deal for Rangers, but obviously, and what I would say to that as well, finally, is I'm sure that Gerrard and Ross Wilson have really done their homework on his character and his temperament. I'm sure if he was really someone who, had no intention of fulfilling his potential, they wouldn't have signed him. He's signed on a whim. They will have done their research on whether they think he's a character who can improve the squad at such an important time. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. I'm quite excited for it quietly, but I'll maybe wait for the first few games to see how he does.
Yes, he seems like a character. I had a tweet from a fan yesterday which tickled me, I have to say. Great talent, but I've aged about 3 extra years watching him do Cruyff turns when he's playing fullback. Can play all positions, but plays them all as if he's a centre midfielder with N'Golo Kante behind him. It certainly seems like a maverick, Jonny.
Yeah, no, listen, I really like the sound of this guy. I've got to be honest. There's two schools of thought. I had a close friend of mine who's a big Rangers fan, was WhatsApping me last night about it and sort of saying, well, it's another player that, are they going to come in and be a first-team starter? Gerrard said that he wanted to bring in players who would immediately impact on the first team, and now it's looking like Lundstrom's going to need a bit of time. This guy is surely going to need a bit of time, and it looks like, Sakala's obviously had injuries, so it's hard to judge. I mean, he certainly came in and made an impact against Real Madrid. But I know what my friend was saying. He's effectively saying, our number one team, our best team is still the team from last year. But I just wonder, at the kind of market Rangers are operating in, the kind of money they have to spend, how realistic is it that they go out and get guys that can just go straight into that team? I think you need to spend big money. I mean, Alfredo Morelos, we're all talking about him being a 15 to 20 million pound player. So to replace him like for like, you need to go and spend that kind of money. I mean, how much is Glenn Kamara worth? We talked about it. Recently he's probably a 15 to 20 million pound player. You can't go out and replace these guys like for like. So what you have to do is replace someone with the talent to become that good. And this is one of the realistic difficulties that clubs like Rangers now with this kind of model are going to have to face. But listen, I think anyone who reads Josh's piece will clearly see the pros and the cons of this guy. The pros are that he's got clearly very, very good talent. And if he can find the form that he showed in the Eredivisie back in 2018, then Rangers will have won a watch. And I think it's kind of the inverse of the point that I was making earlier on. I was talking about John Lundstrom coming in from a completely different environment to a totally new one. I think a player like this going to Huddersfield is probably not actually a great fit for him. But going to Rangers, a completely different ballpark, especially with the skill set. And hopefully that's what we'll see. Yeah.
Finally, lads, let's have a quick preview ahead of Sunday against Ross County. What we're thinking, Joshua? It's back to league action. Do you think they'll get the business done?
Really quick, Joshua, because I think we might have somebody coming in on this call very in about 3 minutes. So.
Here's a prediction, Joshua.
My prediction is I'm looking forward to a nice trip to Dingwall. I think that Rangers will win quite comfortably. I think they'll rotate the squad. Kamara and Roof will come in. I think it will be a performance that signifies they've been given a size 10 by Gerrard. And it might be quite comfortable. Ross County haven't looked great this season so far. And it'll be great to have away fans back in the ground. Really looking forward to an away atmosphere again.
Jonny, score prediction?
Yeah, no, I think probably 3-1 Rangers. I think it'll be a tough game because Malky Mackay will set them up to frustrate. There's no doubt about that. But Rangers have got a pretty good record up there, and I don't think it'll be too much of a problem. And an opportunity to really get minutes in the legs, get the likes of Roof and Kamara back in, and really get this team functioning. I mean, that's another big thing. Is that Kamara's suspension up? Has he still got one more?
It is, yeah.
That's a suspension up. So I mean, that's going to be a big help over there in Armenia. So yeah, great to see those guys back, and yeah, fingers crossed it'll be another one.
Yeah, I'm going for 2-0 Rangers on Sunday. Well, thanks everyone for getting involved. As always, we'll be back on Monday with your morning briefing. We'll have a preview to Ross County on the website. Remember, subscribe to the Rangers Review now for $2.99 a month and support top quality journalism covering the team you love. Have a good weekend.